Welcome, Jessie. I am so thrilled to have you here, and thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be on the Autism Little Learners podcast.
Thank you for having me. I feel like we've been chatting online for so long, so I'm so happy to be here.
I know it's so fun to connect with people that we know online, we know about their life, and then to actually see you on the screen in real time is super fun. So, can you tell everybody a little bit about yourself? I know a lot of people follow you and probably know about you, but if there's someone new to Jessie, the Sensory SLP, tell me about yourself.
Of course. So, my name is Jessie Ginsburg. I'm a sensory trained speech language pathologist. I've run my clinic here in LA for the past over 10 years, and I teach other speech pathologists how to use sensory strategies to build communication. So, that's how my course was created. That is why my book was written, that is about to be released. And I also have 4 kids, I'll say, because that's a fun fact.
That is a really fun fact. That's a
Another
lot.
fun fact is I didn't come up with the name Sensory SLP. I would just start to do interviews and talk to people. And then I started doing interviews where the host would come on and say, "So how did you become the Sensory SLP?" And I was like, "Who calls me that?" And then I was like, "That's catchy. I'm going to take that. Thank you." Now
That
it's
is
me.
a super interesting little tidbit because I did not know that. So you were named by the people that follow you.
I just had my old regular name on there and then, yeah, switched it over. So here we
And
are.
it's perfect. There's so much to talk about within that sensory realm and as it relates to communication. And I know at my house, we talk about autism a lot. We talk about self-regulation. And literally 2 weeks ago, my husband said, if I hear the term self-regulation one more time, because we were going on a date, and he's like, please don't talk about self-regulation. And I'm like, okay.
That is story of my life because my partner, who everyone probably knows as Speech Dude, aka Chris Winger, it's like our pillow talk. It's like we'll have put the kids to bed. It's 9 o'clock. I'm on my way to watch Real Housewives. And then all of a sudden he stops me in the kitchen with like a question about a goal he's writing. And anyone who knows Chris knows he's long-winded. And I'm like, oh my God, let's turn off this part of our lives after 9 o'clock. But it's
So true.
just, we eat it for breakfast. It's like our life.
Yep. It happens here too.
Mhm.
So, when did you start to realize the importance of connecting sensory input with communication?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I really learned this very early on from the beginning of my career when I was an SLP assistant. So I was an SLP assistant. I had this very child-led approach. That's where I learned about sensory. I went into grad school and I adopted more of a like compliance-based approach in the job I was at. And then, of course, ended up going back to more play-based therapy. But when I was an SLP assistant, and it's just crazy. I'm sure you feel like this too, where some of the kids that you've worked with, it was so long ago, but you feel like it was yesterday. Like they're still that little child to you.
Yeah.
And best thing ever is to stalk these families on Facebook in case anyone needs a piece of advice. And then you get to actually watch them grow up, which is crazy.
I know. I've done that now with being in the field for 25 years. Willie is, and I can talk about him, we're great friends with his family, but he just turned 30 and he still trick or treats at my house every year.
Oh my God, you still get to see them.
Yeah,
That's
it's
awesome.
amazing.
Yeah, so I have some kids where it's hard because I don't know if you realize it at the time how much those kids are going to completely shape your future, you know? But I have one boy, and this is the basically kind of like the reason, not reason for my book, but this was like a big inspiring moment for naming my book, which is called Ready, Set, Connect, because I was seeing this little boy, and he was one of these little boys who would just like run all over the place, had so much energy, would go in and out of all the therapist rooms. Everyone knew him. And I had absolutely no idea what to do with him. I didn't know how to get him engaged. The only thing that I could find that he loved was cars. and he would lay down on the ground, play with his cards. And I was like, but how do I engage him now? How do I work on language? And I had no idea. And one day I let him get up onto a table and dance with me. I told the story on my social media. Get up onto a table, dance with me, and jump into my arms. And I looked at him and I'm like, ready, set. And then he goes, go. And it was one of the first words I heard from him after months of, working with him. It wasn't like this was the first day. I felt like I'd tried everything. And he jumped and we laughed. And I just remember thinking like, wow, that's such a beautiful moment that would have otherwise been missed had I just stuck to putting him at the table, you know?
100%. And I can relate to that so much. As you were telling that story, different kids' faces are popping into my mind, and Willie being one of them. That first group that I worked with taught me how to teach. And as you told that story, when you're taking that sensory piece and movement and combining it with communication, you're building that connection. Like, that is such a positive relationship builder that you explained right there.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
absolutely. And it's all, it all starts with regulation. It all starts with, I mean, obviously, a huge benefit to using sensory strategies is that it helps our kids to get regulated. Another huge benefit is it's fun. It's
Yeah.
fun for kids, it's fun for therapists. And I always say, like, your goal could be you could go into a session and your goal could be, how can I have fun in the session? Because once you turn it into that, you're going to realize that the child's actually having a lot of fun if you're having fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love this type of approach. And I think being in the field for so long, I've seen so many different things come and go. And the thing that continues to work and continues to be successful for whether it's a special education teacher, a parent, or an SLP, are authentic connections through moments like you're talking about. And it kind of goes back to, how did you make somebody feel? And I don't know, kids pick up on our vibes, and especially feel like autistic kids, they know who's the fun one, who's going to come and meet them where they're at, and then they're going to back away from somebody that maybe is more compliance based without that relationship building piece in there.
Yeah, totally. And it's just we can't build anything if we don't have that trust, for the kids come in and feel like, oh, this is someone I can trust. This is someone who supports me. You'll be able to get more out of them and you'll be able to do more with them and you'll be able to eventually put higher demands and things that are harder for them and challenges and problem solving just because they trust you.
Yeah. Well said, Jessie. So, can you talk a little bit about sensory avoiders and sensory seekers? Because I think that's where the whole sensory piece can get confusing for people, because it can look so different when you talk about sensory supports that kids need.
Yeah, for sure. So sensory avoiders and sensory seekers are two of the four sensation patterns that were researched by Dr. Winnie Dunn, who's the OT who is the author of the sensory profile. So, but people tend to know that I like talking about those two, avoiders and seekers, because people tend to know what that means. It's a little bit easier for them to understand. I'll start with the thing is about these patterns is every one of them has things that are great about them, and every one of them have things that make that challenging. And that's just the nature of us being human beings, because we all have things about us that are amazing, and we all have things that are going to be challenges for us. So when it comes to kids who are avoiders, these are kids who, we say has a really small sensory cup. Like if we, everything that they do in their day, you pour a little water in their cup, they're going to get that cup full quickly. They're going to get, maybe overwhelmed quickly. They're going to get bothered by things around them easier. So they're going to be more sensitive to the world around them. Whereas kids who are seekers have this big cup and they want new and they want fun and they want intense and they want to be adventurous. And we're like struggling, panting, trying to keep up with them because they have so much energy. So that's the big difference, is that avoiders, only have a little bit. They're very sensitive. And then kids who are seekers just are going to need a lot. And the thing is that with avoiders, if we fill up their cup and they're at their capacity and we keep putting more and more sensory input, they keep experiencing more and more input, that is going to cause them to become dysregulated. And with sensory seekers, they may not be regulated until their cup is full. So they might need a lot of those big experiences. And I know you speak a lot to being in classrooms, and,
Hmm.
these can both be tricky for different reasons. Like an avoider in the classroom might try to leave the classroom.
Yeah.
We've all had kids who try to just get out of there.
Yep.
Whereas a seeker in the classroom may not want to sit down. They might just want to go, go, go.
Yeah.
So
Move and learn.
avoiders tend to love and feel very safe with the predictability of the classroom, but the unpredictability of kids moving around might be stressful for them. Whereas seekers might get bored if there's too much of the same all the time. Like they don't want to, I know this because Chris is a seeker, but it's like doesn't want to go to the same restaurants all the time, doesn't want to make our plans 2 weeks in advance. Like he wants to be on the spot doing what his little heart desires in that very moment. And that can be challenging, in terms of following routines.
Yeah. You're describing my Jason a little bit too there.
And
And I know it's
I'm like
like,
the opposite. I'm like, oh, okay, we had this planned. I've been planning to have sushi tomorrow for the last, like, I've been planning this for 12 hours. So why can't we go to sushi? He's like, but we're going to sushi? What?
don't change it up on me at the last minute.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, no, no.
Now, I know talking about sensory avoiders and sensory seekers, this was a really simplified explanation. And your course, I assume, goes way more in depth on that in your book too. And I saw on your new YouTube channel that you talked about the seesaw analogy and the optimal learning zone. So could you explain that a bit? Because I found it really, really helpful.
Yeah, it's funny because these things just come to be because I'm in therapy and I'm talking to parents and I'm explaining concepts that sometimes feel like a lot. So the sensory seesaw is something that I would just see. These conversations would happen enough in therapy that I would just whip out a piece of paper and a Sharpie and I would draw this for them. And I did that for years before I ever, put it online or in a graphic or a course or a video. But I like to tell parents or therapists that we can picture a child's regulation like a seesaw. And when they are regulated, that means the seesaw is balanced. And I call that their optimal learning zone. So that's where they need to be in order to process language most efficiently, in order to learn, in order to communicate. And if we think about a tipped seesaw, that can represent a dysregulated child. And the reason why it's so important to think about this and just have this image in our minds is because so often when we're working with kids, especially autistic kids, we know that autistic kids are much more likely to be dysregulated. And that's because their sensory processing is different. So we're much more likely to see them and see their seesaw tip. And something that we often do as, teachers and therapists and parents is we see a child dysregulated, but we keep putting the demands on them. We keep asking them questions. Keep continuing on with the activity. And all that's going to do is further dysregulate them. So in those moments, we need to think about how can I get the seesaw back to center? How can we bring our kids back to this optimal learning zone? Because otherwise, we're not getting as much out of them and they're not getting as much out of what we're doing.
Hmm. I love this lens because I think you work with different teams when you're in the schools, and I've worked in a couple different schools. And when people understand that, it makes things so much easier because the other lens is like, well, they're just acting up to try to get out of XYZ. So we need to do the XYZ activity so that we show them they can't get out of it by doing whatever the behavior, dysregulated behavior is. And it's like, I wish we could flip that for everybody and say, if we proactively try to keep that seesaw level, it's going to help everything, including relationship.
Yeah. And you hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's what I've been preaching is how can we take more of a proactive approach to regulation? Because right now it just tends to be more of the put out the fire, reactive kind of approach. Like, oh, we're going to do this activity until the kid's dysregulated and then we'll give them a break. Or
Right.
until we see signs that they're getting to be dysregulated and then we give them a break. When in reality, there's so much we can do to be more proactive and we can try to keep that seesaw balanced, because for kids who are going through life, their seesaw tipping, coming back to center, tipping, coming back to center. That's not helping them, feel feelings of safety and security. That is them living in this dysregulated state constantly or fear of the dysregulated state. So it's one of the things I hear a lot is, but this won't work in a classroom. Kids have too many different needs. There's too many kids. What can I do? And I'd be happy to talk. We could talk a little bit about that if you think your audience
Oh,
would
yeah,
want that.
definitely. I feel like in the classroom, it is challenging because you have several kids. However, what's going to be harder, meeting those needs on the front end, or when you see just a small bit of dysregulation happening and, going into that mode of let's get the seesaw balanced? Or is it going to be easier to have a full out meltdown, disrupt the entire classroom, and try to come back from that? It's the
Yes, I
first.
just love everything you're saying. I'm like, I've said these things at one point or another, either out loud or in my head. We're on the same wavelength here.
Good, good.
Yeah, and that's what I talk about is like, I know it feels like a lot because to understand every person's unique sensory systems, like, yes, I get that that's overwhelming, but the reality is that it's actually easier in the long run and
Mhm.
it's a win for everyone. It's a win for the child who's more regulated in class. It's a win for the teacher who is able to have a student in there who's actually learning and not have to take away time from the other students. It's a win for the parents who feel comfortable sending their kids to school. I mean, it really is a win for everyone. So it's like putting in a little bit more work on the front end will save hours of stress,
Mhm.
energy, overwhelm over time.
I think something too is it's not always a quick fix on the front end. And it's recognizing that student. We get to know our students. We know what a certain sound means, a certain look means over time. So if you have a student come in and they didn't sleep last night, their parents told me they were up all night. This might be a day where our goal for the day is just to keep the seesaw even. And that means we might throw aside our plan, like the skills we were going to work on. I call them the teaching skills, but before that, we have regulation, connection, and routines. And you have to kind of go back and forth between all those. But if it's a day where they're just off, our whole goal might just be regulation and we don't get to the other things, and it's okay. And
Yeah.
that can happen
And
in a classroom.
yeah. And I've had plenty of speech sessions like that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where the focus is regulation, the focus is helping them feel like they're in a place with people they trust. And most of our kids, like, they're not coming in to that state for no reason. It all happened. Like, I know that when my kids come here after school into the clinic, that they must have had a really long day. Something's going on, or
Yeah.
not slept well, not
Mhm.
feeling well, all of that.
I feel like sometimes too in the classroom. Now, back when I first started as an SLP, of course, I was teaching all day in the classroom. And then a couple nights a week, my side gig was working in a clinic where, you're one on one, you have the nice, if you're in a great clinic, you have the nice sensory supports. But I think having that experience for me helped me over the years really lean into the advice from the therapists that are working with them one on one. So maybe they are only seeing them one day a week for an hour, but they get them in that one on one setting. And so sometimes their advice, they might see things that work faster than we do in a busier classroom setting. So, really, that team approach with each other instead of just dismissing, saying, well, they only have them one on one. Of course, they're going to be better there, you know?
Yeah, and it's funny because there's so many, my partner Chris is a school SLP, so we get to talk about this stuff all the time. But like there's huge benefits to being in a school that we don't have in the clinics. The fact that you get to see them in a group setting and you get to be on a team with so many other people all on the same campus, and that's really valuable. And that's really, you're able to really impact a child's life, spending way more time with them or getting to have people in your immediate surroundings who get to spend more time with them,
Yeah.
makes a huge
Yeah.
difference.
And that kind of
Uh,
leads into the next question. Like, what type of sensory activities do you recommend for special education teachers or SLPs in that school setting? For us, it's preschool, but I'm sure you've collaborated with enough people or been called in to consult with kids. What are some things you've seen work?
Yeah, I love this question. So in my book, I talk about three different ways. There are more, of course, but I talk about three different ways that we can really help kids using a sensory-based approach. And the first one is with sensory strategies. And I think this is where their minds tend to go when we hear the word sensory. And I like to think of sensory strategies as, activities that a child can actively engage in, like going and jumping on a trampoline or going through an obstacle course, something like that. I would consider a sensory strategy. And then the next two are things that I think are so underrated and things that are particularly useful in a classroom and in group settings, which are how can we modify the environment? And then how can we adjust the child's routines? And I'll start with adjusting routines because that's such a fun one. Because what kid should be sitting in a classroom for like an hour straight, right? Like it's beneficial to every person in that class to take some kind of a break. So you get to decide if you're there in a big classroom with a lot of students, okay, after this activity, are our kids going to need something where we got to give them some movement, give them a little boost of energy, or do we want to do something that's going to be more of a calming activity for them? And this is something that, is so easy to use in classrooms, things like group breathing exercises or mindfulness or coloring. And it could be a whole group. Yoga, stretching. And these are all things Chris does in the schools. He does them with, up through high schoolers. There's if you work for a school, you can get the Headspace app for free. I
Oh,
don't. I pay like $50 a year, but Chris has it for free. I pay, and these are things we use all the time. They're like these short 3-minute videos. You could get some with Sesame Street characters, and they teach you all about breathing, and you get to breathe with Elmo. My kids at home love it.
aw,
And it's so calming. I have like yoga cards. We do that all the time in our groups in the clinic.
yeah.
But if you're thinking of, well, we need our kids to get a little movement, what can we do? There's like some amazing videos on YouTube for them to. There's one called Animal Action, which is
Oh,
like
yeah.
the best ever because it's this woman in like her jazzercise outfit in the 80s and dancing like different animals, freeze dance. The website, oh my gosh, I say this website name all the time. I can't believe I'm blanking on it.
Animal action, that brings me back because we in early
Yes.
childhood do our own like gym class. So we animal action was like the best one. In the gym, we don't have a screen or anything, but
So
we had
good.
probably the CD to start with, and that was
Yes, I used to have the CD.
the most popular ever.
And Go Noodle, free website. Like I've come into classrooms and had the whole kindergarten class like pull up Go Noodle. There's a roller coaster and they all stand up and they all move with the roller coaster and go up and down. So, trying to just figure out, okay, can we add in some calming kind of breaks into our day? Can we add in some movement breaks into our day? Stuff like that makes a huge difference. So looking at the kids' routines and then trying to insert those.
Hearing you talk about that, it makes me think how lucky I've been over the last 10 years at the early childhood setting because the general ed preschool teachers that I worked with naturally were putting not maybe not those exact sites, but after group, they're always up doing some kind of movement activity. They have a kind of a sensory area in the classroom that any kids use. Um, Seating that looks different for different kids. So I know it's not like that everywhere, but it just validates. I'll have to give them a shout out. Like
Yeah.
Angie, who I worked with, she just does a phenomenal job with that. With
Yeah, and those are great examples of, how can we modify the environment, and things like flexible seating makes a huge difference. Like, can there be a yoga ball in the classroom in the back so it doesn't have to distract everyone, but like yoga ball so that kids could sit on it for a few minutes if they want. You probably know wiggle seats
yeah.
that are those inflatable cushions. I like to put those under kids' feet. So put them on the floor instead of, because I don't know. I also am fine with kids sitting on them, but a lot of times I just see them and they like fall over.
Oh yeah, especially our little 3-year-olds and
Yeah. So I put
4-year-olds.
them under their feet and then they can rub their feet on them. Having options for lighting, like we have these magnetic light covers that go over, and those make a big difference. But I think like every classroom should have a calming corner or something. And I wrote an article with Dr. Winnie Dunn for ASHA. And, that's something that we put in there is like having a place in the classroom that just has less stimulation. Because normally you walk in and it's like a unicorn threw up a rainbow, and every letter that you've ever heard of and every animal you've ever known and things dangling from the ceilings. It's very overstimulating. So like calming corner, but just the main goal being to decrease the stimulation in that area of the room.
Yeah. Gosh, we could talk forever and ever because there's so many stories between that we're connecting about. It made me think of like my second year in the classroom. I had a little guy. I'm still learning about autism at this time, but it was Valentine's Day, brought him up to the kindergarten classroom, and he was just like, "Er," at the door. And we're like, what's going on? Let's go in. And he couldn't. He laid on the ground. It was a meltdown. We figured out it's because there was pink and red paper on all the tables for Valentine's Day. And it was just like, whoa, overload, can't go in. So then we knew to prepare him or, talk to the teacher and say, hey, could we ditch the paper this time? And then it worked fine for him. But it's things like that that you constantly have to be thinking about in a classroom, especially if you're not in a self-contained where you have control over the classroom, but you're going into someone's classroom, like really communicating about those kind of things.
Yeah, for sure. I always say that visual input is like the silent dysregulator, because it's not
Yeah.
something we think about a lot, but like just think about when you walk into your house and there's clutter,
Yeah.
and they say, what is the phrase? A cluttered mind space is a cluttered mind or something,
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know the
right? So
exact one, but yeah.
imagine like being really sensitive to visuals and then coming into a classroom like that. It can be so much.
Yeah. Just becoming aware of it is kind of the
Mhm.
first step in helping. Okay. I like interjected, and there were a couple more areas that you're going to talk about. The environment. Did you say the routine?
Oh yeah, we talked a little about all
A little bit
those.
about that. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. So, another question for you, because you are huge on talking about this, and thank you for that. For anyone who's unsure about what neurodiversity affirming means, so you might see people say, I'm a neurodiversity affirming therapist. Can you give everyone a quick overview?
Yeah, absolutely. It's fun. When you said, "Oh, you're huge talking about this," I was like, "Oh, what's she gonna say?" Yeah, this is, like most of us, this was something I learned the hard way. It's very, very easy to get stuck in your ways as a therapist, and very scary. And it's like your world being turned upside down when you learn that maybe the way you're doing it wasn't right. And the first way I ever learned about what neurodiversity affirming practices was through, and you're probably in the same boat as me, because I was teaching therapists about autism for a long time before everyone started talking about neurodiversity affirming practices. And I was teaching courses and had online communities and stuff. And I had one autistic SLP who said, if you respected autistic people, you would use identity first language instead of person first language. And I won't get into like everything behind it. Of course, we always take personal preferences into consideration, but that was the first time I'd ever heard this thought. And she ended up sending me a bunch of articles, not just about, identity first language and embracing autism as being autistic as an identity, but the idea that, autism isn't something that is supposed to be fixed or cured. It's not people who have brains that are deficient. It's understanding that they have brains that are functioning differently. So it's this concept that, autism is not a deficit or disorder, it's a brain type, it's a neurotype. And it's when we start looking at kids like that, where we realize, wow, your brain isn't functioning the wrong way, it's just functioning differently. It just opens our eyes to the possibilities of how much more they can learn and how much more we can teach them because we start doing things in a completely different way.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so it's really just understanding autism as a brain type. And, our goal is to support kids in any way that we can. And a
Yeah.
lot of people say, like, oh, well, if you're just accepting them as they are, how will they ever do X, Y, and Z? And it's like, okay, we can still call autism a disability. We can still say that we have kids and people who need support.
Yeah.
But it's how can we support them?
Right. It doesn't mean that you're not going to do therapy, that's what we call it, and things to support them in building skills that are going
Mhm.
to make their life better in the long haul. It's that lens. And I remember the exact moment when I learned about or actually person first, identity first language versus person first. So all through college and grad school, what little bit that we learned about autism, and then after, it was ingrained in us with autism. You say the child with autism, he has autism. And if you said autistic back then, it would have been very bad. And so I'm still, talking in my community to a lot of people that are learning this. It takes each of us that one time where we just start to learn and, do better when we know better. But it was at an IEP with a parent, and this was maybe 5 years ago, maybe. And she explained it, and she wanted it in the IEP that we would have. He would be referred to as autistic, not with autism. And I remember me and the special ed teacher kind of being like, huh? What is she talking about? Like, this is so not what we learned and have preached and practiced over the years. And so that was the very first time I heard it and started to do some research.
That's so
And I
awesome.
thank
You
her
heard it from
now.
a family.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it was great. Yeah, a lot of the families that I've taught over the years, we keep in touch, and they're one of them. And I need to maybe at some point message her and thank her for that because it started that shift for me. And, once you see it and learn more, then there's no going back.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things where we once we decide I'm going to be a neurodiversity affirming therapist or parent or provider, it's like all of a sudden we want everyone with us at the
Yeah,
same level, but everyone's on their own journey.
yeah,
Everyone will get there. You can lead a horse to water. I love to, share videos of autistic colleagues explaining different things to help others understand. Like there's just if you put autistic voices first, you're going to start learning the ways that the community wants to be supported.
and I like how you said we still go with preferences. So I would say the majority of the first group of kids that I taught, they're 30 years old now. Their parents probably, unless they're out actively looking for information, they're still going to say with autism, and that's okay. That's what they grew up with, and it's their preference, and it's okay. So I like how you said that. So back to regulation. What tips do you have for creating kind of a regulation plan in for a young autistic child, whether it's at home or in the classroom?
Yeah, I would say, oh my gosh, that's a deep question, but I'll
I
give
know.
some easy things to think about. The first thing that I like to encourage therapists and parents to think about are what are the child's triggers. So,
Mm,
what are things that are immediately dysregulating for a child? Because we have this history of like, oh, I'm going to desensitize this kid to this trigger. But in reality, the more respectful neurodiversity affirming approach would be, how can we eliminate or minimize this trigger? So
Mm,
that will help to keep the seesaw balanced, right? Because we know a trigger is gonna knock that seesaw down. So that's a really good thing to think about. But even just by starting by writing down a child's daily routines and just kind of how regulated they are, how much energy they have at different points in the day. And just by taking that and looking at it, you'll be able to figure out, okay, well, the child needs a little bit more like calming breaks here. They could use a little bit more movement here. Um, when they get home, that's going to be the time for them just to veg out and hang out, no demands, do whatever they want, give them that time to recover after being at school, and just start by writing out the daily routine of the child.
that's perfect. That's a perfect place to start. That's super doable. I love to give people kind of actionable steps that are doable, and that is the perfect place to
Mhm.
start. Thank you. Okay, so now on to the things that you offer. You have a course that focuses on training SLPs to become sensory trained SLPs. Can you tell me a little bit about your course?
Yeah, so we teach SLPs how to assess kids' sensory needs and then how to use what they find to create plans for therapy.
All right.
So it's really not something that SLPs learn a lot about, but we know is so important. And I don't have to preach to you because you already know how important regulation is. But being able to take that and make it very actionable, come up with a plan for implementing more sensory based sessions.
Thank you for creating that course because it's so needed and you're helping so many people kind of get on that same page, so many SLPs. So
Thank you.
kudos. Also, you have some amazing news that comes in the form of a book, and you mentioned it a little bit. Can you tell everyone about it and when they can get their copy? Because they're definitely going to want to.
Absolutely. This is so exciting, which is my book coming out, which actually will probably be out by the time this airs. So you can go to readysetconnectbook.com to hear more about it. But it's really a collection of stories of kids I've worked with, what I learned from them, and how you can take that and implement that yourself. And I also have a free guidebook for everyone who buys the book, and that will walk you through all of the steps of the book as well. So I'm just really excited. It's one of those things where it's like so terrifying because I'm talking about, the greatest and also like most horrendous moments of my career. And there's so much to be learned there, but it's just very real. The thing that kept me from writing a book for so long was I'm like, I'm not a researcher, I don't write like that. And anytime I sat down to try to write super formal, I got bored. I was like, this isn't how it's gonna happen. So what I did is I just sat down and I just wrote it just like I was saying it, just like I was talking. And so it should be easy to read, but also fun, entertaining, and lot to learn.
Okay, I can't wait to get my copy. I'm so excited. Okay, one last question. What do you like to do to regulate your sensory system? What helps
Okay, wine, no.
you?
That's more coping. Um, I think what I've learned about myself, and if a lot of people I've learned after talking about this are similar, where a lot of times, like I may not realize I'm getting dysregulated, or I may not act on knowing that I'm feeling like I start to feel my seesaw starting to tip, but I just keep working, keep going, keep going. So, what I'm working on right now is trying to be more proactive with myself and stopping when I start to feel my seesaw tip. And usually for me, it's taking a movement break. You know how you never want to go to the gym, but then you're glad you do?
Absolutely.
Not That's not what I do, by the way. I just take a walk, but I'm here in my office. It's beautiful most of the year here in LA. So I feel myself starting to get dysregulated. I try to get up and I try to move, and movement makes us feel good.
Yes. Yes. You never
What is
regret.
your favorite
Oh my
regulation?
gosh. My husband would laugh so hard at this because the first month of school, when I was in the classroom, this is my first year not in the classroom. So it's the first September that I did not come home from work and cocoon for like, I just needed quiet. He's like, you would cocoon for like 2 hours after school every day. And then you'd come out and you'd be back to yourself.
Oh
So
my
I think
gosh.
for me, I never regret a walk, but like quiet time, or if I'm going to spend money, a massage, that's where I can actually let everything go. So
Massage, yes. Cocoon, I will get there when my kids get a little bit older. I can cocoon
yeah,
myself.
that did not happen until my kids were much older. Okay, so where can everyone find and get in touch with you, Jessie?
I'm Sensory SLP everywhere. SensorySLP.com, Sensory SLP on Instagram.
All right. I will link everything in the show notes. I know that you have to go. And I am so grateful to spend this time with you. And we're going to have to do it again sometime.
Thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate it. It's been so great to chat.